Hello everyone, and welcome back to Blu-ray Boutique. I'm your co-host, Tim Rosenberger.
And I'm your other co-host, Rosalie Lewis.
And today we're going to be talking about Bruce Lee movies. Specifically, we're going to be talking about some of the films that are part of the Criterion Collection box set that was released in the past couple years or so, called Bruce Lee, His Greatest Hits, which releases pretty much, I think, all of his last handful of feature films that he was wholly a part of or partly a part of before his untimely death in 1973. The films that are on the set are The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, The Way of the Dragon, Enter the Dragon, and Game of Death. Today we're just going to be talking about The Way of the Dragon and Enter the Dragon. To help us discuss these two films, we have a special guest, don't we, Rosalie?
We sure do. I have an in-house guest today, and that is Andy Ginestra, a.k.a. my boyfriend and main squeeze. He's the one that introduced me to Bruce Lee's work and just in general martial arts movies. We did a whole Martial Arts Mondays thing last summer and the summer before that, and now we just kind of watch them whenever we feel like it. But he's the reason I got interested in Bruce Lee, and so we figured it would be appropriate to have him join us.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you on. So, Andy, I guess a good way to start is how did you get into kind of Bruce Lee movies and martial arts films?
This goes back probably to an ex-boyfriend of my mom's back in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
He had the Sega Master System. I don't know if you remember that, but it was the precursor to the Sega Genesis. And I was digging around in there, and I found these games, and one of them was called Jackie Chan's Kung Fu. And I thought, who's this Jackie Chan guy? And back then you couldn't just get on the internet and look somebody up. So eventually, after years of looking for this guy's face on television, I came across Bruce Lee, and I thought, is that the same guy? It's like, no, this guy is like on another level. And then from there, I was just hooked on martial arts films. It's not my main foray, but it's something that I've loved since I was a child. And definitely Bruce and Jackie have been sort of like the tipping point in, me discovering and getting deeper into martial arts films.
What about them is particularly maybe attention grabbing compared to other forms of action movie, whether they be Chinese, American, or otherwise?
I think maybe the Ninja Turtles were a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
That was a big thing growing up. But seeing actual humans perform these same stunts and these same moves, you kind of you felt like, oh, I could do this. I mean, you couldn't. You're 7 years old and you're beating up your pillow, but there was something great about the way they would use their body as an instrument. There was something, I wouldn't say necessarily seductive, but just self-empowering. Like, you would sit there and go, man, if I could put that much power into like a punch, or even the power of the mind. If you consider Bruce Lee, the first thing that he would always say is it's not about the hit, it's about thinking about the hit. And I think that's another thing, is that it showed, it kind of gave an example of what you could achieve if you tried hard enough. But, as it goes, there's very little people that reach that level. The other part, too, would be the stunts. Seeing Jackie Chan jump through a shopping cart, and then, a guy throws a hockey stick at him, and he catches it and swings it like a propeller. And, you're just going, wow, this is just... And it's not for everybody. Some people, they really don't, they see it and they go, well, how many times can, Bruce Lee punch a guy, or how many times can Jackie Chan fight with a steering wheel? For me, it's just always been something that I love. And then you go deeper down the rabbit hole and you find bizarre martial arts films. It isn't just this guy versus four guys. I mean, you get into like monsters and demons and crazy animals and the supernatural. There's a whole world in martial arts films that's not necessarily on the surface. And I think, once you break that surface, you go and you discover new stuff.
And you, Rosalie, what was your reaction when Andy first exposed you to these films?
Well, we started with Jackie Chan, and I had seen, I think, Shanghai Noon and Shanghai Nights, but I hadn't seen most other Jackie Chan movies at that point. And so I'm trying to remember now what the first one was that we watched together, but there was a whole series of them, and I just remember, like, I always knew Jackie did his own stunts. He was famous for having broken a million different bones, and like, you know, he's in his 60s and he's still doing it and being very impressed. But like seeing, I think the first one we watched, was it Drunken Master?
But not the one from '78. The one from I believe it was originally in the late '80s, but released here in 1994, I believe.
Yeah, and it's just insane. Like, there's so many stunts. It's funny. It's got a good heart to it, and it's just like Andy said, like seeing people, like what they can really do with their body when they put their mind to it is just really impressive. For me, it's kind of like watching an Olympic sport, because it's something I know I'll never achieve, but I love seeing what they can do.
That's a good, actually, it's a good point to what you asked me before, is that it is like watching an athlete. It's like watching Michael Jordan, or it's like watching Muhammad Ali. There's just something there that's intrinsic to what they're doing, and it's specific to what they're doing. They can't, nobody else can do what they do, and you just love watching this this thing happen in front of you.
And to me, it's better in some ways than other action movies, because especially now, the stunts and stuff are there, and I know that the stunt people are doing, a lot of work, putting themselves on the line, but so much of it, there's so much fast-paced editing, there's so much CGI, compared to back, looking at these guys' work, and it's all real. Like, it might be choreographed, and it might not be like you're actually, breaking somebody's neck when you hear the crack, but what you're seeing is real people doing real actions, and I think that has a lot more impact. What about you, Tim? What was your first exposure to martial arts films? I know these were your first Bruce's, but do you remember your earlier exposure?
Well, like you guys, it would be Jackie Chan would have been my first exposure to at least this type of action film. Especially Jackie Chan, not as much Bruce Lee, but Jackie Chan especially is almost, stunt choreography is like a dance anyway, and he really kind of exemplifies that, I think, even more. And he almost, in some of his stunts, is almost defying gravity in what he's doing, even when he's not, even if he's, sometimes in some of these films they might use a wire or something, but he's not. He's just doing what he's doing by himself, and he's jumping around, he's kind of standing up on walls, so to speak. He's, doing all these amazing things while using this prop and that prop and punching that guy and kicking that guy and all this stuff. And it's just, all really impressive, and it flows all well together and stuff.
So I don't know about you, Tim. I was intimidated before watching my first Bruce Lee movie, because he's almost like this he is a larger than life figure where, about the legend, of the fact that he died really young, that, you've seen his face a million times on t-shirts, on posters, his image has been used probably almost as much as like Marilyn Monroe or Elvis or something, And so seeing like any kind of legendary person's movie for the first time, you're like, okay, is it going to live up to the hype? Am I going to be as compelled by this, or is it going to just be like, oh, I've heard so much about it that it's like it's impossible to really appreciate it the way you would seeing it the first time? That really wasn't my experience, and I know we'll get into these movies a little bit more, but I have to say I was really impressed from basically the word go. So I'm happy to say Bruce Lee, for me at least, definitely lived up to the hype.
Okay, our first film we're going to talk about is called The Way of the Dragon. It is from 1972. It is the third film on the Criterion set. It's one of the, if not, I think, the biggest Chinese hit that Bruce Lee had. It stars him as a guy who is visiting his cousin in Italy. She runs a restaurant that is being hassled by a bunch of gangsters who want the restaurant to, I'm getting even now what the hell their deal is, but they basically want the property for some such and such MacGuffin reasons. And Bruce Lee's uncle has sent him to Italy to help with the problem. And he gets the restaurant a certain amount of trouble at certain points, as much as he's getting them out of trouble. And the head of the gangsters is getting more and more frustrated with him, until he eventually sends in the one-man wrecking crew, the killing machine, the greatest American warrior of all time, sans mustache, Chuck Norris, to fight him in a mano-a-mano iconic fight in a gladiatorial arena. That is basically the plot of the movie. Bruce Lee taking names and intimidating gangsters, along with some jokes about going to the bathroom and
Yes.
stuff like that. And this was his only feature film, at least that he completed, that Bruce Lee directed. He got to, because of his previous hits, The Big Boss and Fist of Fury, he got to not only star in it but write and direct it. And I know when I was reading anyway, the film before this, Fist of Fury, was quite serious, and he played quite a serious, angry person, and it was very political. And as a kind of a counterpoint to that, he wanted to add a bit of levity and comedy as opposed to drama to kind of balance out the action scenes. How did that work for you guys? Did you like the comedy? Would you have preferred kind of some more drama and conflict, or what did you guys feel like?
So for me, I think the comedy worked well because it was a side of Bruce I was less familiar with, since my first one was a different film that we're going to be talking about in a minute. But I enjoyed seeing the more comedic side and seeing him as like a fish out of water, where, he's somebody who doesn't speak the language. He's out of his natural environment in Hong Kong. He talks about how in Hong Kong, the food is better, and he, goes fishing and he practices his martial arts, and the sophisticated woman that owns the restaurant, sort of, you can tell at the beginning, is just like, who is this guy and why did my uncle send him here? And then, eventually they come to find out that he is really well able to defend himself and to defend them against these gangsters. But I loved kind of seeing him be like completely uncomfortable and in this weird, environment where like he goes to a restaurant but he can't speak the language, so he just kind of points to things on the menu. He ends up with like 6 or 7 different bowls of soup, and it's just one funny thing after another, right? So yeah, I definitely enjoyed seeing that more comedic side, because I think it disarms you to think, oh, like, I'm not going to take this guy seriously, and then all of a sudden just like the people in this movie, we're blown away by what he's capable of.
Yeah, it's almost a childlike. You see a very childlike nature with him when he's not fighting.
I remember seeing it the first time, and I think it was the last one I had seen out of the bunch. I was accumulating the VHS copies as I could, and for some reason, the Way of the Dragon always kind of eluded me until I started working at Blockbuster. And I found it, and I watched it, and it was surprising, but I like seeing him sort of investigate things, like as a child, He's just, everybody seems alien to him, and he doesn't seem sure of himself, really. And that's totally opposite of what you would have gotten from The Big Boss or Fist of Fury, is this guy that's going to step in and, take care of business. And this guy, he's like, girls are looking at him, and you think he should be flirtatious back, but it's like, wah, 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 and he's like, yeah. What? Why are you looking at me? And he just, like, he does whatever he can to, like, evade the situation.
And he's totally, like, oblivious to, like, girls. Like, this woman hits on him very obviously, and it's very obvious that they don't speak the same language, but it's very obvious she wants to have sex with him. And then when she comes in with underwear on and no top or bra or anything, he's like, oh my god, that's what you want to do, and then runs out of the way.
Yeah. Exactly. He's like embarrassed.
Yeah. I certainly liked, I think, the comedy in this more than the almost melodramatic stuff in Fist of Fury and the kind of self-seriousness in that movie. But I didn't find it, like, terribly funny, but I liked the attempt, and I am sad that Bruce Lee didn't get to direct more films and develop that more, because I'm curious how he would have, because I think he would have kept, at least in some of the films, kept going down a comedic route to a certain extent. So I would be curious to see how he developed his comedic sensibilities as an actor and writer and director, and how he kept developing, funny things for him to do in the middle of fighting and stuff. But what did we think about him as a writer-director? Because obviously we know he can act well enough for what he's doing. He can obviously fight, but, this was really his only real shot at a completed film that he got to write and direct.
I liked it. I didn't expect where some of the twists and turns were going, even though I perhaps should have, looking back on it. But I think I was just so caught up in the action and the early scenes that are a lighter tone that by the time it got around to a few more serious moments, I just wasn't expecting it. And so they had a little bit more impact. I would have liked to seen, where he would go and where he would develop. But I did like, some of the shots, especially towards the climactic scene where he's in the Coliseum, because you really get to see a lot of kind of cool camera work and angles and things like that. And I think too, just the way that he stages some of the fights and, you know, the way that they're shot, you really do get to see a lot of the action where you feel like you're up close and you're in it, but you can still see what's going on, which, you know, one of my biggest pet peeves about action films now is that you can't really tell what's happening. You just feel the camera moving a lot. This one, you know, the camera doesn't do as much movement. You're just watching the people move, and I like that better.
I think seeing something coming directly from Bruce's mind as a storyteller and as an actor is one thing, but I think it needs to be said that it says something for Tadashi Nakamoto. Nashimoto is his name, I believe. He was the cinematographer and the director of photography. And so, you know, and I've been on film sets before, and when the director is directing himself, he has to step in as the actor, and of course you have the guy covering you as the director, who usually is the DP. They do a lot more work than I think people give them credit for. Mm-hmm. So you're not just seeing Bruce's directing, but you're seeing it through the eyes of, you're seeing Bruce's vision through the eyes of a second guy who just completely captures it perfectly. Because as we say, this was really kind of like a fun departure from what you would normally see Bruce do.
I just want to talk a little bit about some of the other characters in this movie, because I think Bruce is the star, of course, but there are definitely some other very memorable folks that are in this movie. I think particularly the guy that plays sort of the main villain's henchman. His name in the movie is Ho, and he's Paul Way. Yeah. Paul Way. Very flamboyant as a villain. You know, the way he dresses, the way he speaks and carries himself. I think in the early 70s, I feel like that probably was a little bit like surprising for people. And I think it would still be surprising to have what certainly reads as a gay gangster in any movie even now. So seeing that back then, I think probably was fairly surprising and kind of refreshing. And then I also really enjoyed the whole like team of waiters / martial artists. I love how they set it up that the restaurant is always so dead because these gangsters are out there that the waiters have nothing better to do, so they go in the back and they practice their martial arts. And you know, the chef doesn't approve, but he's like, whatever, they're going to do what they're going to do. I really quite enjoyed that little element. And then I actually do really think that Nora Meow is the owner of the restaurant. She does a great job of holding her own as well, because she kind of has to play it straight against all these other things that are going on. But she does a very convincing job of being like this determined woman who's like, look, this is my business. I'm going to stand my ground and not give in to these gangsters no matter how much they threaten me. And I think that, too, was a great touch, and not something that you see a lot in martial arts movies, is having, you know, a woman kind of be the center of the story. I have to speak to some of the noises / like sound effects that are happening in the movie, too. I love how Bruce Lee, at least in this movie, kind of makes a lot of chicken noises when he's in his attack mode, and it just cracks me up every time. Noises. Well, I mean, he's like, you know, cock-a-doodle doing. I don't know how else to describe it, but it's really entertaining.
Well, I think we've lost all Bruce Lee fans at this point. Bruce Lee cock-a-doodle-doos here. They're one of the best martial artists in history, and he's cock-a-doodle-doing.
Yeah, you know.
It's all I can describe it as, but, you know, it's very distinctive.
I mean, I've heard it said as like monkey noises, but chickens.
Well, that's what I was thinking of. Sorry, guys. No disrespect.
Well, he was throwing punches so hard and so fast that, you know, it wasn't just about psyching out and intimidating the person in front of you. I mean, you know, say you pick a fight with somebody at a bar and you're like, all right, tough guy, let's go, and he starts going,
yeah, I would probably step back.
Your head will cock to the side and go, what did you just do? But then he hits you and you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I can imagine when they were dubbing, he was mimicking the movements he was doing in the choreography and just letting that, you know, that noise.
See, it's a chicken noise.
No, it's not. It's not a chicken. See, now I'm going to always hear it as a chicken.
Well, you're welcome. I've ruined it forever.
Okay, I think I'm going to go get some food, guys. You guys can continue to discuss the chicken noises.
You going to have any chicken?
Anyway.
The thing I liked about Way of the Dragon, though, I think, again, it's not perfect, but I think that there was sort of this. There was a spy element to it when he's going around with those wooden darts and he's taking guys out. There's the sniper scene, which I thought was very well done. Just trying to have a night with the girl, with his cousin. He goes out there in the dark and just makes the guy waste his bullets, and then he hits him with the darts. And I loved the darts. I don't know why. I've always loved that he was fighting with those. When he first walks into the restaurant towards the end, and he's got 4 of them in each hand, and he just throws them, and all the guys they're holding their wrists, they drop the guns. But as far as the story, like, I liked all that. I liked the kookiness of again, him sort of exploring this world he's in. It's far more interesting than just, my school versus your school, or, you kill my next, or I'm going to get revenge. Our gangs are going to meet up every 20 minutes or so and fight, and then walk away, then talk about how we lost, and then get back and fight again.
Well, I would agree that maybe the fights are the highlight, but for me, I did enjoy a lot of the interstitial, plot that was happening, because I think, again, like I said, I think the humor kind of balances it out a bit. I could personally watch him walk around with Chen Qinghua and explore the city, and she's like, look at all these beautiful ruins, and he's like, oh yeah, there's some bad parts of town where I'm from too that are falling down. He has no
he doesn't get that these things are ancient history.
Exactly.
It's not just a building on First Street that's dilapidated.
They're walking by the
Coliseum.
Yeah, and she's like, oh yeah, it's too bad they don't keep this up better. And she talks about, oh, this beautiful palace was built by this emperor to impress his wife or whatever. And he's like, yeah, it's a waste though. He should just live in a smaller house.
Yeah, I know, it's very. I love it.
It's entertaining for me. So yeah, I enjoyed it. It's not so much plot that you need a lot of that you need a lot of explanations or anything like that, but I just enjoyed. It's kind of like watching a musical that's based on a band's or artist's whole history, and the stuff in between might just be kind of stitching the songs together, and that's probably how this movie is too, where it's kind of stitching the fights together, but I think it does it effectively.
Well, speaking of the fights, how did we, obviously you go to Bruce Lee mainly for the fights, so how did we like the fights in this one?
I know we're probably supposed to be most impressed by the Chuck Norris fight.
It's building up to that.
I know, but I preferred some of the earlier ones. I really liked the first time he takes on the gang in the back, alley. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, I think it's that scene that you just referred to when he first fights the people in the alley. I think that's when he uses the nunchucks in the film, and I love him whenever he uses nunchucks in movies. I don't know if it's just because kids of the 80s and 90s would be growing up with Ninja Turtles partially, and Michelangelo being kind of an undersung Ninja Turtle, have that weapon be such a big highlight and be seeing it used so proficiently and expertly and impressively, and in so many different ways, was just really cool. And I was sad. I was happy whenever he picked them up or pulled them out of absolutely nowhere, and which he does in one of these films where he just has them all of a sudden for some reason. And I was sad whenever he put them down because he was very impressive with them.
I think the end fight with Chuck is one of the greatest fights. It's two titans. I think it's one of the greatest fights in cinema history for what it is. All right, but if you think about, say, the best fight scene in that movie is definitely, I agree with you guys, the alley fight. It's just exquisite. It's funny in a way because the way these guys are reacting, as each guy drops off, the remaining guys are looking at each other like, what? We thought we were going to kick this guy's butt, and it's he's, you walk up to him and it's just like, oh, pow. You're on the floor, and they're like, okay. And, the who is it, the guy with the mustache?
Yeah.
He keeps nudging everybody to go first.
Right. He doesn't want to be the next one taken out.
Like, no. Also, I agree with you about the nunchucks. That is definitely a highlight of his...
repertoire.
Yeah. It's iconic seeing him with it. It's like there's him, and then there's Michelangelo. Those are the two, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's very... we can throw in Three Ninjas if you want, but that's going back...
Yeah, I don't. Okay, I think we've lost the Bruce Lee fans again by comparing him in any way to Three Ninjas. But
well,
no, I didn't. I'm not. It's not about Bruce. It's about the nunchucks.
Yeah.
No, I know, I'm joking. But
okay, who would win in a fight, Michelangelo or Bruce?
Well, it depends. Are they having a chucking contest? Because I think Michelangelo might win in that.
I think Bruce, man, because Mikey doesn't have that. And believe me, I'm the biggest Turtles fan
anyone knows.
And my collection of turtle stuff. Anyway, but Michelangelo doesn't have, I think, the concentration. I think in the lore of the turtles, in the story of the turtles, he's not exactly the most. I mean, I would think maybe Raph or Leo would give him a run for his money, but Bruce would take them out.
Well, if you brought out a steaming pizza, I mean, Bruce wins automatically.
Well, yeah. Well, but I think Bruce and Michelangelo would bond over pizza. Bruce, it seems like he might be a person who would enjoy a good pizza.
Actually, yeah, I think he would. He wouldn't want to fight Michelangelo. He'd want to study him.
So the next film that we're going to be talking about is probably Bruce's best known film, the one that perhaps if you've seen any Bruce Lee movie, you've seen this one, and that is Enter the Dragon, which came out in 1973. It was directed by Robert Clouse, and it was written by Michael Allen. And this one also was produced by the aforementioned Raymond Chow, and while production was done by Warner Brothers, it was also distributed in Hong Kong by Golden Harvest. So that's the Raymond Chow company. This was an extremely profitable movie. In fact, it remains one of the most profitable films of all time. It earned 400 times its budget, which is pretty incredible. The plot, such as it is for this movie, is one that has been borrowed by other movies that followed it. But essentially, there's a bad dude that lives on an island, and this bad dude is having a tournament where he's recruiting all these fighters from all over the world for nefarious purposes, and they go there even though perhaps they should know better, and then they have to sort of figure out how to get off this island once they're on it and how to stop the bad guy from doing bad things. So our main fighters are Bruce Lee as Lee. He is a martial artist that instructs people at a Shaolin temple, and he actually is working with a government agent to infiltrate the island. Then we have John Saxon, aka Sexy Saxy, and that's what I call him. He's Roper, and he's a martial artist who also has a gambling problem, and he is invited to Hans Island. And then we have Jim Kelly, who is an African-American martial artist that's invited to Hans Island, and he and Roper, the aforementioned John Saxon, served in Vietnam together, so they know each other before they get to the island. And then we have several other folks of important note, one of which is Bolo Young, who I'm sure we'll discuss, very intimidating figure in this movie. And then we have Bob Wall, who plays O'Hara, and he is Han's bodyguard and just a creepy looking dude. And we also have Han, who's the main crime lord bad guy. So that's the setup. Lots of fighting happens and lots of iconic moments, but let me hear what your thoughts were on that.
It's a nice mixture of, there's some comedic stuff in there, but there's also very serious stories in there. Like you said, Bruce Lee is part of this martial arts tournament, which he's really using just as an excuse to investigate the island, to figure out what this bad dude, as you put it, is up to. And he's also kind of looking to get some vengeance on Robert Wall's character for killing his sister some time ago. So there's some a vengeance story in there as well. And then Jim Kelly, I loved in the movie. I thought he was really fantastic. I was actually a bit sad that they didn't use him as much as I was hoping. They kind of, I think, underused him for the skills that he, as far as I could tell, he had, and just for how absolutely ripped that dude was. So yeah, I loved them. I loved the three of them. The two of them were great together. I wish they had more interplay. One thing I will say is my biggest disappointment with this movie is that Jim Kelly and Bruce Lee did not have a fight scene together, because I think it would have been very impressive, and I kept waiting for it, and sadly it didn't come. But
yeah, that would have been cool. I agree. I also really just wanted to see Bruce Lee face off against like each person in the movie, but that would have been a really long movie. So, and at some point it would have gotten boring, I guess, seeing him defeat every single person. He almost does, but yeah, it was definitely good. I agree, though. More Jim Kelly, more John Saxon, and more of the three of them together. Like, I would totally watch a side quest where they're all just like hanging out and taking on other baddies, a la the Avengers.
What did you think of this, Andy, especially this being his first and sadly only American film?
It was definitely probably the most influential to me, just in terms of, as an artist myself, just wanting to be a film writer, work in film and everything. It was the most cinematic for me. And also, its influence stretches past film. Basically, the same plot for The Quest, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme. And also, anyone who's played Mortal Kombat knows that not only is that the exact plot, it's this tournament of fighters, but, they actually, Liu Kang, the main character, is basically Bruce Lee, down to his sounds and his movement and his fighting style. And I think that was another thing that was engaging for us as kids, is that there was this sort of afterlife for Enter the Dragon. After you watch the movie, you could go play the game.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though we called him Liu Kang, we really were trying to be Bruce Lee.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, that was a big thing. And yeah, so.
Did you see this one as a kid, or did you watch it later?
Oh yeah, definitely saw it. Yeah, when I was younger. Yeah. It was probably the first one that I did see, because it was the most accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Since it was an American film, it didn't have those title swaps like Fist of Fury or Chinese Connection, Way of the Dragon, or Return of the Dragon, as it was released here. You get that sort of. It was easier to find.
Mm-hmm.
It was the easiest to find.
So the only two movies of Bruce Lee's that I've seen are this one and the previous one we discussed. But when I compare the two in terms of the action, I would say that I really enjoyed the scope and the scale of the action in this movie a little bit more. I think while I enjoyed kind of the rough and tumble rowdiness of, the previous film, this one really feels like it's on another level. It's got, there's way more people involved. There's way more fights not just happening between the main characters, but almost like a whole melee breaks out at one point, and it's kind of like all hell breaking loose. But you also have individual showcases for Bruce on his own, or for, other characters in this movie on their own. So there's a little more story to it that balances out the higher level of action. So I know in the previous film you said that the action was the highlight for you and the story was a little less so. How did you feel about that balance in this one?
I mean, the story is still pretty simple, and again, everything is still pretty simple, but I think they did a better job of building some character stuff, not just with Bruce Lee and his past and his, what happened to his sister and all that stuff, but, John Saxon's problems, Jim Kelly's problems and stuff, and their relationship together. It's all, they don't go deep dives into it, but it's enough to establish some interest and some rooting power and some empathy for their characters. And the story was, again, like you said, it was more focused on story, it was more focused on plot a little bit. So I was interested to see where this mystery would lead, and this mystery would lead. Like, there's a mystery of what is happening to the women of this island that he has on there. They're just kind of disappearing, what's happening to them, and all that stuff. So there is something to hold your interest in between the fighting, I think, more. So it's not just like you're counting time until Bruce Lee goes and beats somebody up.
Yeah, the other thing I would say, too, is just the setting is really interesting. So I liked that we got to see, the Rome setting for the previous movie. This one maybe is a bit more traditional in that, like Andy said, Mortal Kombat is also set in a very similar way. But I liked, especially inside this building or this compound that this guy is running, that Han is running, there's a lot of intricacies and like secret passageways, and there's a very elaborate setup with a lot of mirrors and doors that flip back and forth that makes it really fun to watch these fights, because it's then not just the people, but it's the setting and how they're interacting with all the things around them that make it especially interesting.
Yeah, it's almost James Bondy in certain ways with, the secret things, and, the villain is almost, a Bond villain in certain ways with his secret island and all his stuff that he has.
Yeah, actually Jim Kelly's character even says to Han's face that he's like a comic book villain, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Man, he was straight out of a comic book.
Exactly. So, he definitely almost like calls that out in kind of a meta way. The other thing that I really liked about this movie was the music, which was by Lalo Schifrin. And I liked that it has, some of those like traditionally Asian sounding elements, but it also has, kind of like that funkiness that you would, later go on to hear in like blaxploitation movies and Shaft and things like that. It has a little bit of that going on, which just makes it feel very 70s and very classic almost instantaneously from the opening credits.
And then when Bruce is sneaking around with the snake in his bag, out in the garden area, Lalo's score is definitely, it's got that.
Exactly.
It's like very spy sort of,
Yeah, it definitely has all those kind of like stings and sounds that you expect that go right along with a spy thriller type of movie.
Just a side thing, Bolo Young, he was also an interesting figure when we were kids because he had this menacing presence. When I think Bloodsport is what kind of turned us on to him. We were watching martial arts films in the 80s and in the early 90s, and there's a shot where he's got the wide eyes and he's grinning into the camera and the camera's circling him. And Rose, I think you know what I'm talking about because you are a big Bloodsport fan.
I am.
He's cracking his arms.
Yeah.
Or not cracking his arms, but he's flexing, but you hear like the knuckles cracking. And he's kind of got this like look on his face. And every movie he showed up in, it was like, like this guy's gonna do some damage. Then I saw Enter the Dragon, and I'm like, Bolo's in here, and he goes down pretty quick.
He does.
He makes a presence, but he didn't have that tough guy persona yet.
Well, but it should be mentioned that this guy has a back that's like as big as a Cadillac. I mean, his shoulders are insanely wide. It almost felt like they were putting some sort of prosthetic on him. He is just so
prosthetic back.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so sort of strangely huge. But yeah, very intimidating guy. I think one of the most out of the bad guys in these films that I watch, I think one of the most threatening, even to a certain extent, even more than Chuck Norris. I think that's partially because Chuck Norris is a bit more well-known and the other Chuck Norris jokes and all that stuff. This guy's a bit more of a enigma, so I think he's a bit more intimidating.
A quick mention to the final fight. Was it all you hoped for? Do you feel like it was in the room of mirrors, and just Han with all his different hands?
Yeah, I liked the hands. I liked, so the mirror thing, the thing that immediately reminded me of, and maybe other movies have done this, but it reminded me of Lady from Shanghai, the Orson Welles movie, because there's a final scene in a fun house in that movie where somebody's shooting and you don't know where the bullet is coming from or where it's going, and it has that illusion and that mirror effect. And it reminded me a little bit of this when I watched this because, again, it's like the mirrors are playing with your perception, and so you're not sure which one's the real Bruce, which one's the real Han, and they seem to not know either at times, and it's really iconic.
No, but what I liked about the mirror thing, though, is that Bruce Lee did something. Well, maybe somebody else has done this at a certain point, but I hadn't seen it. Where he actually does a smart thing where he starts breaking the mirrors to help. I'm assuming to help him, differentiate where the real Han is and stuff. And I thought that was actually a smart thing that I think a lot of people don't think about. Other times people just kind of have to know which one's the reflection, which one's the real person. And then Bruce Lee just starts breaking the things to make him easier for it, which I thought was a nice touch by whoever came up with that.
It was very reminiscent of a film called Wait Until Dark, starring Audrey Hepburn.
Oh, yeah.
And she finally realizes that she knows the house like nobody else because she's blind.
And the power is out, so nobody can see.
Well, no, she starts hitting all the light bulbs.
Oh, that's right, yeah, okay.
She starts knocking out to make it dark for him.
That's right.
So it just creates that illusion for the other guy, And,
well, I think this was, again, out of the ones I watched, I think this was the best kind of final boss fight of them. I think even in a way more than the Chuck Norris one, because I think part of the problem with Bruce Lee is sometimes he is too good at certain points where he doesn't, bad guys, whether they're henchmen or the big final boss, they don't always put up enough of a fight, and he wins sometimes a bit too easily.
Almost like Superman syndrome, right?
Yeah, so I think in this one, the villain is obviously, beaten eventually by Bruce Lee and stuff, but, he uses his skills and disadvantages to his advantage, the bad guy does, and gets a lot of good hits on Bruce Lee, and seems the biggest threat and the most likely to be able to beat him eventually. And Bruce Lee seemed to struggle the most with this one, so it was the most satisfying in that regard for me.
Yeah, and I think the fact that, so for me, the differentiating factor between Han and Chuck Norris wasn't necessarily their skill level, but I felt like Chuck Norris kind of came out of nowhere. We have no history on the guy other than the opening credits, which tell us that Chuck Norris has, won all these martial arts tournaments. but like his actual character in the movie is just a random bad dude. And this one, we've seen Han be so brutal and so evil, and we know what he's capable of, and there's no line he's not willing to cross. And so having all of that history infuses this character with more than just his physical dominance. It's about that mindset of him being willing to do whatever to get what he wants, and that makes him scarier.
I think Han is a bona fide villain as opposed to Chuck's character in Way of the Dragon, where, like Rose said, he kind of comes out of nowhere, and I think Bruce is almost like, now I got to take you down, because when he does beat him, there's this sort of like respect where he brings him his jacket, his Geed's jacket, and his belt, and he lays it over him out of respect, just kind of like, sorry man, I didn't want to have to do this. But with Han, it's like, I'm taking you out.
Yeah.
This the whole place is got to get taken down. So I think that's another thing why it might not have been as menacing, because it's kind of like, why is Chuck here?
Right.
It's the difference in terms of attitude for the fight. Kind of going off of what you said, Andy, is the Bruce Lee Chuck Norris fight is kind of like, it's kind of Wesley against Inigo Montoya, and the Enter the Dragon final boss fight is Wesley against Fazzini, the Wallace Shawn character, where one has respect and one has no respect at all. So there's a different kind of, like you said, more menacing, more villainy kind of relationship in one of the fights. So, Rosalie, watching these films, Way of the Dragon, Enter the Dragon, discussing them and stuff, does it inspire you to let your dear boyfriend Andy show you even more of these films that we didn't get to talk about?
It definitely does. I definitely want to bring back our martial art Mondays for this summer, and for the remaining Mondays that we have, at least in the summer. Maybe we'll spill into the fall as well. And now that I've started to get to know some of the other cast of characters that we see in these movies, like the Bolo Youngs and the other folks that we see, it's making me want to go down the rabbit hole of those folks' films that didn't have the bigger names. So who knows what else we might discover and uncover. Andy has quite a great collection of martial arts movies. There's definitely some that are available online, and then we'll probably talk about an upcoming collection that we just heard was announced this week. So more on that later.
One of which of the films, just if I can mention, one of the films that I was going to show her next, as far as martial arts goes, is a film called Sting of the Dragon Master, and it stars Angela Mao, who played Bruce's sister in Enter the Dragon very shortly. Also starring Sammo Hung, who has worked with Bruce and Jackie mostly.
What are there any other martial arts films that you would recommend to people if they if they like Bruce Lee, or maybe even if they don't like Bruce Lee, maybe if there's other things that you've seen that are very different from Bruce Lee but also satisfying in the martial arts genre?
I would mention three. Definitely one would be a film called Wu-Tang Master from 1983. It's directed, written by, choreographed, and starring the Ewan brothers. Rose and I were just discussing anything from Shaw Brothers is great. That's a whole rabbit hole. It's a film called Legend of the Liquid Sword. And the third one I would say is probably one that people have heard about a lot is Master of the Flying Guillotine.
And are those easily available, or like
some of those are kind of hard to find. I mean, I think Master of the Flying Guillotine is streaming. And I think the Shaw Brothers stuff is probably streaming. Wu-Tang Master, unfortunately, is not. And the DVD is very much out of print. It's on YouTube. Not to promote YouTube too much on the podcast, but...
it's okay.
If it's not available in other ways,
sometimes
you got to do what you got to do.
But people who like film are listening to this, so they have... somebody they know might have it, and they might say, hey, can we watch this?
Right, or you could check the library. Sometimes libraries are a good source for those out-of-print DVDs.
Yeah, people... Yeah, for people who are listening who maybe check out some of these films that Andy has mentioned, or who want to check out these films and can't find them, do check your local library. Also check this website called worldcat.org, where you can search not just United States libraries, but libraries around the world. So just type in whatever random movie you want, and you can see if someplace in the United States or somewhere outside the United States has it. And especially if it's in the United States, if you're in California or something, if you want to get something from New York, you can ask your local library, can you request it? If everybody agrees to do that, they'll send it over. You can watch it. So there's a lot of different ways you can watch stuff. It can really help you out. I've watched quite a bit of stuff that's out of print and saved a buttload of money not buying it on eBay. So do try that if you're interested in having trouble finding stuff. But YouTube is good too for some stuff.
Yep. Well, another one that Andy didn't mention, but he introduced it to me, and I think would be a good entry point for people that maybe have seen some but want to see more and maybe see what the possibilities are for martial arts films, and that would be Kung Fu Hustle. And that is just a really fun, zany, intense movie that is, I mean, fairly recent, right? A lot of these movies we're talking about are from the 80s, and Kung Fu Hustle was released, I believe, in, was it the early 2000s?
2004.
Yeah, and that was directed by Stephen Chow.
Chow. And, he also did Shaolin Soccer. Kung Fu Hustle it's a parody, it's a farce, but it's definitely one of the most brilliant choreographed martial arts films ever made.
And for the more, slightly more serious recommendations, I just recently watched, speaking of Criterion, Criterion has released, if you want to go more the Jackie Chan route, they did release somewhat recently the Police Story 1 and Police Story 2, which are both from the 1980s. They're just in one box set linked together. I haven't seen Police Story 2. I have seen Police Story 1. It is quite fun. And if you want to see some Hong Kong style Jackie Chan action and see him directing and doing some slightly more serious stuff in certain ways, I would check it out. It's a lot of fun.
And the artwork in those sets are absolutely
Phenomenal.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and especially if you are having trouble getting a hold of the Bruce Lee set, those might be a nice substitute. Until you can get to do that. So
a little bit more budget friendly if you're looking to save a few pennies but still get something cool.
That too. It is much cheaper as well.
All right, so now that we have talked about our Bruce Lee movies, we're going to transition into talking about some movies that we have both recently picked up that are from boutique labels, as well as some coming soon announcements. So on a related note, we mentioned the Shaw Brothers a couple times as we were discussing things, and completely by accident or, some sort of divine verisimilitude, Arrow just announced this week, as we're recording, that in December they're going to be releasing a box set called Shawscope Volume 1, which indicates in my mind that they're doing a Volume 2 and maybe other Shaw releases, but this will be 12 movies from the 1960s era and 1970s era of the Shaw Brothers, which was a very well-known studio in Hong Kong. And they released a ton of iconic action movies. And so the things that are going to be on this particular set, I think it's all from the 70s actually, includes King Boxer, which was also known as Five Fingers of Death, as well as the boxer from Shantung, Five Shaolin Masters, Shaolin Temple, Mighty Peking Man, Challenge of the Masters, Executioners from Shaolin, Chinatown Kid, The Five Venoms, Crippled Avengers, Heroes of the East, and Dirty Ho, which maybe that has a different meaning back then than it does now. I don't know. I have not seen any of these, but I watched the trailer for this box set, and I was definitely lured in. Andy, I believe you've seen at least some of these films, right, from the set?
Yes, I have. Some I'm not familiar with, but it sounds like a great set.
Yeah, so that's coming in December. Perfect Christmas gift for yourself or somebody else you know would enjoy these types of movies, and definitely on my wish list. And then the other one that I want to highlight is from a smaller boutique label called Fun City Editions. They put out a lot of kind of like limited
production. I haven't heard of them.
They've only done a few, I think, so far. They're kind of getting started, but I've been very interested in their work. And the one that they're putting out that I'm interested in for July is called Rancho Deluxe. It's from 1975, and they're pitching it as kind of Jeff Bridges before he was the dude, and this is sort of a precursor role where it's, he's in the West. It also stars Sam Waterston from Law and Order, and apparently he and Bridges play kind of a pair of hippie cattle rustlers who are messing with things that they probably shouldn't be at this era. Other people in this movie include Elizabeth Ashley, who is in Vampire's Kiss, as well as Harry Dean Stanton, R.I.P., total legend, Richard Bright, Slim Pickens, and a lot of other great people. So I'm super intrigued. I've never seen this or heard of this before now. Apparently, Jimmy Buffett provides the score, so that adds a special element as well. It just looks like a fun movie, and I've been really into Jeff Bridges movies lately. I recently watched Cutter's Way and loved it. So, yeah, I'm very intrigued by that one. What about you? Any new releases that you're looking forward to?
So one I'm interested in getting, I don't know how much of these I will get, but I know Shout Factory is going to be releasing, I think it's just the first 5 Halloween films on, I think it's a 4K release, so that's very impressive. And it might give me to finally watch. I've only seen the first Halloween film, so it might be my chance to see more of them, especially Halloween 3, which I'm actually very interested in. So they look like very nice sets, so I would be very excited to pick them up if I do finally get them. It is maybe a bit sad for some people that they're not going as all out as they did with their Friday the 13th set, but these still look very good. And these are again 4K as opposed to, I think, the Friday the 13th was just like, that's not a big deal. Just
only HD.
Only the HD ones. They're being released on September 28th of this year, so a month or so ahead of Halloween viewing. So if you want to spend your October diving back into these in ultra super duper Halloweeny high definition, this is your chance to do that. And hopefully, I'm assuming if these do well enough, they might do the rest of them. So if you want them to do the rest of them, buy these. So yeah, that's pretty much all I had with new releases. But didn't you have something, Andy, that you wanted to bring up? Something that you got recently or are looking to get?
I just picked up the DVD, not the Blu-ray, unfortunately, but the DVD of It's a Mad, 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 Mad World, which is always been one of my favorite films. It was my favorite film for a little while, long ago.
This is the Criterion version.
This is the Criterion version, I should mention, which, how that slipped my mind. Yeah, and if anybody doesn't know, it's starring Mickey Rooney, Jonathan Winters, Dorothy Provine, the Three Stooges, Norman Fell.
Everybody that you could possibly imagine.
Everybody. Don Knotts, Arnold Stane, Carl Reiner.
It's like 8 hours long, so they have plenty of people to...
Yeah, this is the 197-minute extended version, actually. One of the special features I'd like to mention that's on there is the last 70mm Film Festival. It's a 2012 program featuring, cast and crew, but it's hosted by the great Billy Crystal. So that right there is kind of worth your... price of admission.
On that note, though, since we have gone into Criterion a bit more, I'm assuming anybody who's listening to this knows the Criterion sale as we record this is still going on and should still be going on when this is released. I know I have picked some stuff up, and I think Rosalie has picked some stuff up too. Rosalie, what have you gotten, and are you going to get anything more?
Oh, well, I've gotten 4 things, I believe, so far, and the month is still young. We're not quite halfway through, and I have a couple more paychecks coming. So I will probably at least get 1 or 2 more things. We'll see how it goes. I picked up The Lure, which was the mermaid musical that I mentioned last time. I also picked up Nightmare Alley, which is a film noir that is being remade by Guillermo del Toro. And I had owned it on DVD. I have the Fox Film Noir DVD collection, but I wanted to pick up this special edition in part because it just looks amazing. The artwork is so cool for it. I love the cover. I love this movie overall. It's a Tyrone Power movie. It's a film noir set in a circus. I mean, what more do you want? It's fantastic. And then I also picked up Betty Blue. It looks intriguing. I believe it's French. I usually like French movies. That's an extreme generalization, but it's true. And then the last one I picked up is one that had been on my Excel spreadsheet of movies that need to be Criterions that finally became one, and that is Pariah from Dee Reese, about a young woman who is coming of age and also coming to terms with the fact that she is lesbian and isn't quite sure how to tell her family. So a nice little diverse group of films, and I'm hoping to pick up Deep Cover when that comes out a little bit later this month.
Oh, yes.
So I had I have bought 4 things so far. If I get anything else, it is probably just going to be one more thing because I'm very tight with money right now. I will say my plan was to go to Barnes & Noble, get 4 things. I knew exactly what I wanted. The website said they knew they had everything. And I was going to get The Human Condition, Stagecoach, which I forgot that the Criterion did, but I was reminded of, and it sounded cool. Nightmare Alley, like you did, and Charade, which I remember watching with my mom as a kid and enjoying it a lot and finding it a lot of fun. They only that I could find, though I did have a small child with me and couldn't look through as much as I wanted, I can only find The Human Condition. So I spontaneously got 3 other things I was not planning to get. I got Showboat from 1936. Which is directed by James Whale, one of his non-horror films. It's a musical In my opinion, really his last hurrah as a director before he lost his kind of freedom and started doing more formula stuff that his heart wasn't really into. And I got Yojimbo, which is obviously the famous Kurosawa film, which I know almost nothing about, but I'm very excited to dive into it so I can get more educated with some Kurosawa goodness. But then I got the Carl Theodor Dreyer 1932 film Vampire, which looks cool, has a cool cover on it. And I've seen, I believe he also did The Passion of Joan of Arc, which I love. So I've been very excited to see more of his work. About Rosalie, you might be proud of me, and hopefully other people listening are proud of me as well, because I did something that I think is unusual for people like you and I, Rosalie, and possibly for Andy as well. I bought something, Showboat from Barnes & Noble, and I actually watched it a few days later.
I am impressed, because a lot of times I buy things and then they sit in shrink wrap for a while before I find the time to unwrap them. So I'm very proud. Yeah, there's a few. I just reorganized my movies, so it reminded me, I have like this long list of ones that I still need to watch. So yeah, very relatable. So looking forward over the next few months, we are going to be covering in August the early films of Al Pacino, which will include Panic in Needle Park and Scarecrow. Then in September, we're changing gears a little bit. We'll be covering the Golden Age of Television, which is from Criterion. In October, films to be determined, but they will be foreign horror movies, so that should be fun. And then we will reveal the rest of the schedule as the rest of the year comes along. Thank you so much for listening to Blu-ray Boutique. If you'd like to find us in between times, you can find my writing on F This Movie. You can also find me on Twitter at Rosalie Lewis.
And you can find me on Twitter at CinemaPackRat, where you can find link to my YouTube channel.
And of course, special thanks to our host site, which is 25yearslatersite.com, and on Twitter at 25ylsite. And a special thanks to our super special guest for this episode, Andy Ginestra. Andy, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It was a great time.
All right. And until next time, have a wonderful time and watch some Bruce Lee movies.